Welcome, I'm Danielle Hill Donnelly. I will be facilitating this Healing Moments group, and this is for Psychoeducational Groups Human Services 444. Welcome. Alright, so education on issues surrounding the exploitive process in the commercial sexual exploitation of children. Very complex issue, 10 minutes, I'm going to try to cover as much as I can. So, why is this happening? Well, Washington State Office of Attorney General reported in 2011 that this is a result of the fastest growing criminal industry in the world. This is a global problem, so obviously foreign and domestic, so there's a lot of moving pieces. Twill Green-Taylor did a wonderful article on there are so many complex issues fueled by many factors, and this is gender-based violence, this is how women are portrayed in the media, and just so many more, moving pieces. So, 99% of children have been sexually abused, and the average age is 8.5. So obviously there is an express need for development of programs to serve this vulnerable population. All right, audience, who are we teaching this to? Service providers, those who work with youth, law enforcement agencies, shelters, CPS, foster care systems, healthcare staff, officials, and these are just some identified areas of interest that is understood. Branding is part of the culture that these predators and people will use to kind of mark their girls, and so we want to be very cognizant that there are so many service providers that we want to have a very specific approach when serving these providers in the community. Okay. Recommended theories. Basic principles of learning. These are traits, characteristics that are known through research to impact the learner, whether it's the ability to learn, etc., etc. So these are ways of assessing this, and for judge generalization theory, learning principles and the meaning attached equals superior application of what you are teaching in your psychoeducational group. So as a facilitator, you want to just really push the application, providing examples and interaction activities to really bring it together, applying this in different settings, but obviously, moving it in an approachable time field, not just kind of, rushing through it, but proper application of expressed needs for the program. So, purpose, goals, objectives. We've mentioned this is educational, and the goal is for learners to gain a thorough understanding of what CSEC is, identification of these victims, and the proper use of the intervention points. So, intervention points, moments in time, discussed in an earlier slide. These are the objectives that we would want to see a learner understand. So, listing risk factors, red flags, obviously goes hand in hand with the identification of victims or prevention, if they obviously fall within that category of having a lot of red flags, that predators will kind of, come in, recruit, exploit, coerce, etc., etc. So, groups are to perform role-playing exercises. Most importantly, we want to see a demonstration of the appropriate use of these intervention points as to help. Okay, so group activity. What is CSEC? Let's address the common myths, and it's very important that you have this conversation of, I say child prostitute. What does that bring to your mind, to your image, vocabulary, maybe examples of maybe like movies, etc. Media. Now, to challenge that outdated term of child prostitute, let's bring in the newer, modern, more appropriate language, for this vulnerable population, which is a sexually exploited child. So comparing and contrasting what that looks like to your audience and having a very open dialogue, and you obviously want to follow this with a discussion of, okay, so where were you at before, where are you at now, and what do you really think about this, more updated term that is obviously encouraged. Okay, so identifying the victim's next activity. So you want to discuss risk factors, individual, environmental, social. So like this implies individual, factors of what are, going on with me specifically, my environment, school, home life, whatever it looks like, a community center. And then social. So what are the broad, umbrella workings of what's going on in the community, in media? What are the messages that are being applied into my life? And how does that make me feel about myself? Does that make me more vulnerable to be exploited? Or does that make me more confident and secure in appropriate relationships where I can express love with caregivers? So, your activity with the group, categorize these. You have examples and you put them, is it individual, environmental, or social? And then at the end of the activity, there will be a discussion of, well, what kind of conversation did you have within your group for placing these risk factors? Because ultimately, a lot of these can go in many different areas, and that, expresses this complex issue. It's not always black and white. Okay, intervention points. So, the meat and potatoes of what we've been kind of discussing thus far, and will continue. As the youth you're working with, rather, not for. So motivational interviewing, coming alongside a teen and saying, instead of kind of like questioning and drilling them, like why are you on the street, et cetera, coming beside them and saying, I see that you're out on the street. This must be really, really tough for you. Can you share, or what must that make you feel like? How are you surviving? This is a really tough situation. So opening the doors to let them speak so that you can use those moments of time advantageously. So this is just reiterating that, report to proper agencies, and group reflection. All right, so evaluation. After the learning has taken place, a test will be administered, results will be used for future program development. Secondly, a questionnaire. We want to assess the learner's satisfaction. How did they feel with the information presented? Was it, before they came? How much did they know? Did they gain a very thorough understanding? And did these activities really stimulate and promote open conversations that have really impacted, the cultural and the stigma around this complex issue? And so we will include instructions, rating scales, and blank areas to be used at each learner's discretion, obviously. So what works well? I already had a concern for this injustice, so I've watched a few documentaries. I already had some research that I could draw from, so it made it easier in locating articles, academic journals, and media portrayals. Okay, so what would I do differently? Interview a helping professional in some of these arenas of providing treatment services. Obviously, that gaining an expert's knowledge in the field is a great resource, and really broadens your knowledge. I would work in a group to benefit from diversity of others. I would request materials from these very known groups who, the U.S. Department of Justice, Polaris Project, Shared Hope International. They've done so much work in CSEC, oftentimes referred to as, trafficking. They're very separate, sometimes gray, and an overlap. We want to use terminology, appropriately as we've defined this presentation, but using, these resources. What I learned, I worked alone, but I would say that I really valued this time, and I stayed really true to the appropriate, valid research, because this issue, it's so important to accurately report and reflect on these complex issues. All right, thank you very much.